In this video, I'm going to be taking a comparative view of Canon's new 5D Mark IV compared to its predecessor, the 5D Mark III, and how they compare for wildlife photography from my own perspective. Starting with ergonomics, the 5D4 is a tiny bit lighter, but not as much as you'll notice. But the grip and the bottom of the camera, pretty similar. Perhaps the biggest difference, there's a dedicated little button to help us change focus groupings, or we can set it to do a variety of other options. 5D3 is pretty good in the hand anyway, and has most of the controls that I find necessary for wildlife photography. It's great that they're similar, and it's easy to switch between the two cameras in the field if you're shooting them side by side like I do. The 5D range is a full frame series, and it's about, one of its attributes has always been image quality. So one of the big differences between the Mark IV and the Mark III is resolution. So the new camera goes up to 30 megapixels in resolution on its sensor. So for most wildlife photographers, more megapixels is usually better. That allows us to crop a little deeper if we haven't been able to get close enough to the subject, for one thing. For another, it also allows you to make a larger print. So the 5D4 can print bigger than the 5D Mark III can. How important that is to you will depend on your own requirements. When it comes to resolution differences between the 5D Mark IV and the 5D Mark III, I decided to print out an image from each camera just to give a visual indication of the difference between a 30 megapixel file, which is this pride of lions, shot with the 5D Mark IV and printed at 300 dots per inch, compared to a 22 megapixel file shot with the 5D Mark III and also printed at 300 dots per inch. So it's a significantly bigger image, but it's not twice the size. How important that extra size is to you will depend on your requirements. Another important aspect of image quality is, of course, low light capability and how much digital noise the camera shows. So in that regard, I'm finding the 5D Mark IV to be a really good performer, and image quality for me, perhaps 2/3 of a stop better than on my 5D Mark III. So as a wildlife photographer, I'm often shooting when ambient light is really low, at the very beginning of the day when the sun might not have risen yet, or more often in the late afternoon. The sun's already gone down. Some of the animals that I like to photograph only start moving then. So I'm finding the 5D Mark IV to be very effective in those conditions. And I'm coming away with images in the 1600 to 3200 ISO range that are really, really looking good. So that seems to be the biggest area of improvement to me. On the very highest usability scale of what I'm comfortable going to on the camera, I'm finding that ISO 6400 and then sometimes even ISO 8000 or ISO 10000 is enabling me to get images that are usable, perhaps even for print with a little bit of noise reduction. So a very clean sensor, and one of the biggest advantages for me with the new camera. Another important aspect of a camera that might be used for wildlife photography is speed. So the outgoing 5D Mark III shoots at 6 frames a second. The 5D Mark IV shoots at 7 frames a second. So a small advantage and an improvement. What's just as important, or perhaps even more so than the maximum continuous speed for a wildlife camera, is the buffer and how long it can keep shooting. So the cameras are rated similarly, even though the 5D Mark IV has larger files that require a longer time to write and take up more space. So I'm actually going to compare the two cameras side by side and just see what sort of how many images we get in a continuous burst. I have my 5D Mark III set up for maximum continuous shooting speed. It's loaded with a 167 megabytes per second SanDisk card, and we're working to the CF drive only. So that's the capture before it stops, and if I check on the back there, we can see 21 images. The last image taken when the buffer was actually full. Now let's see what the 5D Mark IV can do. We're going to do the same thing with the 5D Mark IV. CF drive only, loaded up with a 167 megabyte per second SanDisk SD card and maximum continuous shooting speed. And perhaps 2 images that went after the buffer got full. And just have a look and see how many we've got there. So 20 images. So as you can see, bigger files on the 5D Mark IV, faster continuous shooting speed, but it captures around about the same or perhaps 1 frame less in a continuous shooting burst than the 5D Mark III. What's also really important to take note of is what card you're using on these two cameras. On the 5D Mark III, it has a CF drive as well as an SD slot. But what's different to the 5D Mark IV is that the SD drive in the 5D Mark III is pretty slow. So you'll find that continuous shooting speed like this doesn't come anywhere near what I achieve in the same camera if I'm using a CF card alone. So that pretty much limits my use of 5D Mark III to CF cards only from a wildlife point of view. So with the 5D Mark IV, the card drives pretty much look the same at a quick glance to what's on the 5D Mark III, with a CF card drive and one ahead of it for SD cards. But the difference is the SD drive in the 5D Mark IV writes much faster than the one in the 5D Mark III, and it perhaps only runs 1 or 2 images behind the fastest CF cards at this point in time for continuous shooting. The 5D Mark IV comes with Canon's newer battery, which is the LPE6N, slightly higher rating than the LPE6, which looks identical but comes out standard in the 5D Mark III. But both batteries and chargers totally interchangeable, and I've upgraded my 5D Mark III to the new battery. It adds on another 50 to perhaps 100 shots to a charge. Battery life in the field, I'm getting over 1,000 shots with either of these two cameras, and that's regardless of whether I'm using my 500mm lens or 400 or 100 to 400 or even shorter lenses. I have image stabilization switched on the entire time, but I don't spend a lot of time looking at my images on the back of the cameras, but my usage also includes a bit of live view shooting on most days. So perhaps 1,200 images out of a charge on the 5D Mark IV and maybe 1,400 on the 5D Mark III. On the 5D Mark III, it's possible to shoot the camera in manual mode with the large rear wheel changing shutter speed and the front control changing the aperture, and set auto ISO to take care of the ISO requirement. but there's no way on the 5D3 to compensate if you're in this mode. If I then try to engage exposure compensation, I end up getting bracketing, and that's not what I'm really looking for. So Canon have improved this on a lot of their recent cameras, and on the 5D Mark IV it works a whole lot better. On the 5D Mark IV, M mode and auto ISO is implemented a lot more effectively. So as you can see on this camera, if we just wake it up, if we're in manual mode, I set my camera to change the shutter speed on the back wheel, the front control for aperture. Auto ISO takes care of the ISO speed that I need for my scene, but if I need to compensate, I can just use the Q button and we have working exposure compensation. Where the 5D Mark IV takes a big jump forward is in live view. So compared to any of the earlier 5D models, this one is just so much more effective in a number of ways. It's got a dual pixel sensor, which means that there's focus readings being taken from 80% of the sensor surface, and the end result of that is very quick focusing, which is also extremely accurate. Another advantage is the touch screen allows me to pick a focus point just by using my finger to show the position of where I want the camera to focus. So I use this quite a lot for wildlife photography when I'm trying to work at angles that would not be comfortable otherwise. So it's also a very big advantage for using the 5D Mark IV for video work. So compared to earlier 5Ds, this one is in a class of its own when it comes to the live view autofocus performance. When it comes to autofocus, the 5D4 has got some advances over the 5D Mark III, perhaps the most significant being slightly wider coverage of that autofocus grid across the frame, but still the same 61-point number of points to choose from, and very similar autofocus menu setup. I don't really consider the autofocus a differentiator between the two cameras, because the 5D Mark III is really good in autofocusing anyway. But certainly the 5D4 takes that same focus system and enhances it, takes it a little further along, and a little more similar to the 1DX Mark II in some of the custom autofocus setups that you can carry out on the camera. To sum up the differences between the 5D Mark IV and the 5D Mark III, both very capable full-frame Canon wildlife cameras. Perhaps the biggest improvements in the 5D Mark IV come in the form of its bigger resolution and its slightly cleaner image quality when the light gets really low. It's also got a host of small improvements, some of which may not be useful for every photographer out there, but they will be useful for some. Perhaps the biggest of those might be live view and video capture, which is a lot more powerful in the 5D Mark IV. But again, two very good bodies for wildlife photography, and hopefully the video helps make your choice a little bit easier. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep getting videos about Canon gear from a wildlife photographer's perspective.